This is an organizational triumph for the Eagles. This was about everybody. All right, welcome in. 2025 is here. It is the February 11th edition of the Breer Report. The 2024 season is in the books. We have a champion. It is the Philadelphia Eagles after 285 games in 5 months. Jeffrey Lurie, Howie Roseman, Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts, Jalen Carter, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. You can go on and on and on and on. They are the champions of the world. And we are going to get to the big picture of this for all of those guys in just a minute. But we're going to start this edition of the Breer Report with a look at their offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, who is now off to the New Orleans Saints. He will be their head coach. This is the worst kept secret of Super Bowl week, that Kellen Moore would be going to New Orleans as the Saints' next head coach. That should be official shortly, if it's not official by the time that you're watching this. And so I think the first question would be what the Saints saw in Kellen Moore. And I think it's really apparent in what we've seen from Kellen Moore the last 3 years. He's a guy who played in the league and a guy who was groomed very early on in his time as a coach to be a head coach. That's the way Jerry Jones saw him in Dallas. And Jerry did with him in a lot of ways what he did with Jason Garrett 15, 16, 17 years ago, which is brought a guy on board and had him as a player and had led him into coaching meetings as a player and had led him into game planning meetings as a player and put him on staff with the idea that he would eventually be the team's head coach. Obviously, that didn't wind up working out there. Over time, they wind up firing Jason Garrett, Mike McCarthy inherits Kellen Moore. And then over the few years they were together, they tried to meld their offensive systems. Some things worked, some things didn't. Then in 2023, he's off to the Chargers. He becomes Brandon Staley's offensive coordinator in Los Angeles. That doesn't work out because the whole staff gets fired after a year. And so that creates the opportunity for the Eagles to go and get him, which they do, and win a Super Bowl in their only year with Kellen Moore as their OC. So why does all of this stuff matter? Well, I think the varied experiences that Kellen Moore have are important here. He is the son of a coach. He always knew he was going to coach, but his path in coaching has not come on a straight line. That much is for sure. He has been now the young assistant trying to earn his way. He has been the guy anointed as the next one, and a guy who is seen as sort of the heir apparent in a franchise that's obviously one of the most recognizable in all of sports. He was in that pressure cooker. Then he goes to the Chargers. He has a chance to work with a different type of quarterback in Justin Herbert than Dak Prescott. That doesn't work out as everybody figured it would or hoped that it would. And then he goes to Philadelphia. And I think what's really interesting about his time in Philadelphia is that, again, he had to work with a different type of quarterback in Jalen Hurts. But he also had to work with a staff that he had largely inherited. He inherited Jeff Stoutland. He inherited Kevin Patullo. He inherited a bunch of guys on that side of the ball who had their idea on the way things should be run, who had their own systems that they had been a part of. And he was forced to do a lot of head coach type of things over the last year or so. Well, what does that mean? Well, when he first came in, again, he had to get everybody on board with the way that he wanted to do things. And so he had Jeff Stoutland, the offensive line coach there, present the run game to the group. He had Kevin Patullo, the pass game coordinator there, present the pass game to the group in the way that they had done things over the couple years previous. And then he presented his own system. And over about 6 months, they were able to put everything together in a way that was incorporating a lot of those things, but was not too complicated for the players. In fact, by the time they really started rolling offensively, what they were doing was fairly simple. But it's what worked for the players. It's what worked for the coaches. And being able to manage all of that, and being able to manage different egos, the guys in that huddle, Saquon Barkley coming in, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts, the guys, on that offensive line, a lot of guys who've accomplished a lot of things as pros. That's head coach stuff, having to manage all of that. And so he winds up winning a Super Bowl. I think that ability to manage people is an important piece of why he's able to win a Super Bowl. So now he's going to move on and become the head coach of the Saints. A couple names I would watch for his Saints staff. Doug Nussmeier is somebody who was with him in Dallas, was with him with the Chargers, with him with the Eagles. I don't think he's going to raid Nick Sirianni's staff, but that could be one in particular that he brings with him, maybe as the coordinator, maybe in another role. I think for Doug, Nussmeier is a relative no-brainer. His son is the quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier at LSU. So there's a family tie down there as well. And then on the defensive side of the ball, it wouldn't surprise me if Brandon Staley, who was Kellen Moore's boss there in Los Angeles, winds up becoming their defensive coordinator. I think that'd be a really good hire. Staley worked in San Francisco this year. He's only been a defensive coordinator once, but in that 1 year with the Los Angeles Rams in 2020, he fielded the NFL's number one defense, which is why he became a head coach with the Chargers. So Kellen Moore off to New Orleans, and that'll segue us into our second topic for today, which is where the Eagles go from here. They have to replace their offensive coordinator. That'll be a big decision for Nick Sirianni, how he replaces Moore. Petula would be a name to watch, a guy who's been a very loyal soldier to Nick Sirianni over the years, a guy who's been his right-hand man, who's earned the opportunity to do this. Of course, he's been passed over twice now. Brian Johnson was named offensive coordinator after Shane Steichen was poached by the Indianapolis Colts in 2023. Last year, after Brian Johnson was fired, they turned to Kellen Moore. Petula feels like this is his time, a good opportunity to reward someone on the staff for Nick Sirianni. A lot of other questions that they have to answer. What do you do about Mekhi Becton, one of their starting guards? What do you do about Zach Bond, who was a revelation as a free agent linebacker addition? What do you do about Josh Sweat and Milton Williams, who are important pieces on the defensive line? Those two guys combined for 4.5 sacks in the Super Bowl. So you have some big picture questions. But I don't think that these are situations that you look at and say, yes, this is going to break the Eagles. This Super Bowl championship for Philadelphia was about the sum of the parts and all the things that have been put in place. And that's not to take anything away from any one guy, because we obviously usually assign these things to a head coach or a quarterback. And Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts were both fantastic in the playoffs as a whole, not just the Super Bowl. But this is, an organizational triumph for the Eagles. This was about everybody, from ownership to the front office, to the scouts underneath Roseman, to the coaching staff and Sirianni, all of his assistants, to the roster, as well-balanced a roster as you'll find in football. And I think going in, we all knew that the Eagles had the better roster. I think everybody felt that way. They had a better roster than the Chiefs did. I thought it was relatively close. What we saw on Sunday was something else. It didn't feel like it was all that close. And I don't think that that's a shot at the Chiefs. I wouldn't look at it that way anyway. I think that that's a tribute to the sort of team that was put together in Philadelphia. So that's a long way of me saying, I think Josh Sweat probably goes and cashes in. I think Milton Williams cashes in. I think Zach Bond cashes in. I think Mekhi Becton cashes in. I think all those guys are probably gone. But the infrastructure of what the Eagles has built is so strong that I think they can withstand those sorts of things. And if you listen, 3 of the 4 guys that I named are guys on the fronts, right? Like you have an offensive lineman and 2 defensive linemen as part of that group. Those guys will be tough to replace, of course, but those are areas where the Eagles are well fortified because they have poured so many resources into making sure those spots are right. And that's why when Fletcher Cox retires, they have Jordan Davis, they have Jalen Carter, they have Milton Williams ready to go and replace him. That's why when you strike out on Bryce Huff, you have Sweat and Nolan Smith and Jalex Hunt and Brandon Graham in those positions. It's why, over the years, they've been able to replace guys. Like when you have, again, Jason Kelsey, you lose a guy like Jason Kelsey, you have Cam Jurgens and Landon Dickerson ready to go. They have been so well fortified. They have invested so much in making sure the lines of scrimmage are right. I think if they let those guys go, and those guys probably will get overpaid in free agency, and good for them. Those guys should collect on the Super Bowl tax. The Eagles are going to be okay. If there is one, to me, that I could see them potentially looking at bringing back, it might be Mekhi Becton. And here's the reason why. It's not that he's more valuable than the other guys. I don't think he's as valuable as a Milton Williams or a Josh Sweat was to the Super Bowl championship. It's because maybe you're looking forward a little bit. And I wouldn't sign, if I were the Eagles, I'd feel comfortable letting go of Mekhi Becton as a guard. But what if you see him as the long-term solution for the right tackle question? Lane Johnson's going to play again next year. He said as much. But what if you view Mekhi Becton as the future right tackle? That's the one thing where I look at and say, maybe they look at the idea of keeping Mekhi Becton. But again, those are big questions those are big questions the Eagles have to answer. My guess is they let the majority of those guys go, if not all of them go, and they'll be just fine on the other side of it. As for the Chiefs, where do the Chiefs go from here? Well, I think that they are in an interesting position in that I think right now, if you're the Chiefs, you're starting to transition to the Patrick Mahomes 2.0 era. And this is where the Patriots were after Tom Brady and the 18-0 team lost in Super Bowl 42 to the Giants. If you look after that year, in 2008, Brady got hurt. They missed the playoffs. In 2009, they won their division, but got just obliterated by the Ravens in the wild card round. And then in 2010, they got back up off the mat, but they lost in the divisional round to the Jets. So that's 3 years where they, I think you could say they had their dip. And then in 11, they make it to the Super Bowl and Brady 2.0. That version of the Patriots is rolling, and they go to 5 Super Bowls in an 8-year span, and they win 3 of them. That's the challenge for the Chiefs now, is you're going to see now some of the older guys, as was the case with the Patriots, start to filter out. So Travis Kelce, how much longer does he play? Chris Jones, how much longer does he play? Those things are still up in the air. But what you know is that you're going to need to have foundation pieces in place to replace those guys down the line and to be the cornerstones of the franchise. And that brings you to some decisions you got to make. Is it time to pay Trent McDuffie? Can he be one of those guys? Is it time to pay George Karlaftis? Can he be one of those guys? What do you do with Trey Smith, who I think was probably headed to free agency? After watching what you watched there from your offensive line in the Super Bowl, how do you address your left tackle question, going forward? If there's a big swing out there at receiver, do you take that swing? Connor and I talked about this in the podcast. Say Garrett Wilson becomes available. Say the Jets decide, we need to build up some draft capital. Maybe we aren't going to pay Garrett Wilson what's going to take to keep him. Do we trade? If we trade him, can we get a big haul back? If you're the Chiefs, are you willing to go get that haul? I think those things are sort of the questions now. The Chiefs are going to remain a contender for as long as Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid are together, no question about it. But you could be entering that transition phase right now, and how do you handle it? I think that's the biggest question that the Chiefs have to start to answer this offseason. It's a big sort of overarching topic, but it's a topic that I think, will be a pivotal one over not just this offseason, but the next couple of off seasons, and how they set up to sustain Patrick Mahomes' success into his 30s. So that'll be it for us for today. Wrapping up Super Bowl 59, looking forward towards the 2025 offseason. We've got so much coming for you over the course of the offseason. We should have a mailbag edition coming for you tomorrow with the Breer Report. I'll be back on Friday. Might take a short break to go skiing there, but then the Combines the week after that. Again, keep it locked here. Appreciate you guys coming out all year and consuming the content. We're doing great on YouTube. We want to keep that going. Just another way for us to reach you guys. So be sure to continue to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Continue to check me out on all the social media channels and everything else. Appreciate you guys. And like I said, we're going to have the 2025 offseason covered for you. We're going to come to you again on Wednesday with a mailbag. We'll see you guys then.